Hi everyone. So up until now, this course has focused on how to help other people and particularly how to help your students. Today, I'm going to be talking to you about yourselves and how to protect yourselves from burnout, how to look after yourselves, and how to help yourselves. So why is this important? Well, it might seem obvious that it's important to look after yourselves. But another important reason is one of the biggest predictors of acting unethically or crossing boundaries and so on is burnout. So when people burn out, they are less able to make good ethical decisions, and they find it difficult to deal with difficult situations and make the right choices. And so when we were talking about ethics and ethical behaviour, when you're burning out, it's really hard to maintain those boundaries that we talked about. And so in order to to stay an ethical and competent teacher, it's important to safeguard your own well-being and prevent or respond to burnout when you see it happening. It's also, really important for your career longevity. And I'm not a teacher, but I have, seen quite a few teachers in my psychology practice who have burnt out in the first, say, 5-6 years of working. And, it's a lot of time that you put into studying teaching. There's a lot of passion that goes into it, wanting to make a difference in young people's lives. And so with a little bit of knowledge and information and effort, you can maintain your career longevity and have a good career that you were hoping for when you started studying teaching. So the first thing to understand about burnout is that it doesn't just come out of nowhere. You don't wake up one day and suddenly feel burnt out. So it's a continuum. So it goes from feeling fine, generally, might be a lot of demand at work, and you might be taking home lots of preparation for the weekends to do, and you might have a lot of marking at night time, but you're still doing fine and still enjoying the job and still able to keep up with everything. And then as we move along in that continuum, that's when you start to notice stress starting to impact you. Maybe you're getting a bit irritable. Maybe you're feeling tired. Maybe you started to have an extra drink at night. And so, there's certain symptoms that are showing up to indicate to you that stress is having an impact. And then after a while, you develop full-blown burnout. So that's when, it's really difficult to continue working in the same capacity. You feel like you kind of dread going to work, and you feel like you're no good at what you're doing and so on. And it affects kind of every area of your life. And so burnout as a continuum is an important concept, because if we can get these, if we can have interventions when we start to notice stress having an impact, we can avoid this full-blown burnout. And if someone is fully burnt out, it can take a little bit of time to recover from that. So it's best to avoid if possible. So the difference, I suppose, between stress and burnout is that burnout is kind of the result of chronic stress. So, where you might feel stressed about, 2 assessments you've got due next week, chances are when you hand them in, you'll feel relief and you won't feel stressed anymore. Whereas burnout is a result of, ongoing stress over a number of months or a number of years, and it starts to chip away at your ability to cope with stress. So that's important to understand, that burnout isn't just stress, it's a syndrome. And it can take a little time to recover from burnout, even up to 2 years for some people who are severely burnt out. And so it's much better to step in before it gets to that point. There's 3 components of burnout that would help you identify if you're feeling burnt out, or if you're just chronically stressed. So the first one is emotional depletion, and that's where you feel like you've got nothing left to give. So maybe students are coming to talk to you about something and you just feel like, you know, I have no care factor. I have nothing to give. I have no empathy to give. There's just nothing there, where you feel like you're really just depleted. And the second one is feelings of incompetence. So that's when you previously felt fairly competent in your role, and you've started to feel like you're less competent or incompetent lately. And that's certainly one of the distinguishing factors of burnout, is that feeling of incompetence that previously wasn't there. And depersonalization. So that's where you start to see, maybe kids as being just an annoyance or another demand on your time, and you are less able to see the person in front of you, and you are more likely just to see them as another thing you have to attend to. So chances are that's quite different to where you started off in your career. So what causes burnout? Well, initially there was a lot of research on individual factors that caused burnout in people who worked in the helping professions. So that includes teachers and nurses and doctors and psychologists and counsellors and social workers. So anybody who works with people and helps people in some way, works in the helping professions, and those people tend to be more at risk of burnout because they are, using themselves to help other people, and that can become exhausting over time. So initially it was thought that the individual tended to predict burnout. So there was a certain kind of personality, maybe people who handled stress less well, or maybe were a little bit more neurotic or more perfectionistic and that kind of thing, people who are workaholics. And there's certainly some element of that. So people who are, who are very perfectionistic do tend to burn out more, because they tend to put in 130% into their job, when that's not sustainable over time. And I think I told one of my tutorials last week, you need to be able to sustain yourself. Don't go too hard too fast. So don't put in 120%, when you start teaching. You need to, pull it down a bit and realize you've got to play the long game, rather than, putting everything you've got into your job. However, so the research has kind of shifted a little bit in understanding of what really causes burnout, and now we have a better understanding that it's more likely the organisation that is the greater contributor to burnout. So that's usually a number of factors in an organisation, but generally it can be summarised in terms of when there's too many demands on you and not enough resources. So that could be there's too many papers to grade and not enough time, or there's too many students and not enough teaching support, or whatever it could be. So that tends to be what causes feelings of stress and ultimately burnout, is the feelings that you don't have enough resources, whether it's within yourself, resources in terms of energy or competence or knowledge or any of those things, versus the demands that are being made on you. Work overload is a big one, so that tends to be one of the leading factors in burning out, is when there's too much work and for one person to do. And that's really important to recognise when burnout occurs in the workplace, is that sometimes there's just too much work and you can't possibly manage that amount of work over a long period of time. So it's important that we don't blame ourselves for responding with stress symptoms when there's too much work. Lack of control and autonomy is another area. So that's when you don't have too much input into the decisions that are made in your school, or you don't have a lot of autonomy about how you teach your classes, or the timings and the structure to your day and things like that. So, lack of those elements can contribute to burnout. Insufficient rewards, so that could be money. It also could be things like getting leave approved or getting promotions and having your work recognised by your boss. And breakdown of community, so that's when there's kind of a toxic environment sometimes in your workplace and there's like a lack of support between colleagues. Absence of fairness, so that's obviously when you see another colleague getting recognised or promoted or getting other benefits when that's not fairly distributed. And values mismatch, so that's when you have a strong set of values, for example, maybe supporting kids with special needs and making things equitable, and yet the school that you're working in doesn't meet those values or doesn't allow you to carry through on those values. So we can have a really good understanding of what causes burnout and what it looks like, but one of the difficulties with preventing burnout is that once you start to get stress symptoms for a while, it can really affect your ability to assess yourself accurately, to really stop and think, look, I think this is really affecting me, probably need to do something, probably need to go to the doctor or go to a psychologist or have some time off or change my work routine. So once things are really starting to get on top of you, you're less likely to be able to do that and to see it kind of in perspective. And it's more difficult to make a decision about what to do. So oftentimes people will blame themselves for not coping. I think they need to work harder or, overcompensate for the feeling that they're kind of incompetent. So they work, harder than they were. And they might need to feel the need to hide the fact that they're not coping. So not telling anyone about their issues tends to be another response to feelings of burnout. So that's the reason why a lot of the times when people start to burn out, they don't get help or they don't do something about it, and then it just gets worse. So one of the best ways to approach that is to think about your first signs of stress. So this is before the stress has really started to impact you and impacted your ability to make decisions and things like that, and respond accordingly. So these are your first signs of stress that can tip you off to thinking, oh, I need to do something about my stress. I need to have a break, or I need to take a mental health day, or I need to go to talk to a counsellor, or I need to reduce my workload, or whatever it might be. So everybody's first signs of stress are different. Some people will find that they maybe start to find it difficult to get up in the morning, or they find it difficult to sleep at night, or that maybe they feel irritable. or hard to concentrate, or they start to get really negative, can't really see the positive in things, start to drink a little bit more. Some people start to isolate themselves, so they might say no to an invitation to go out when that actually could be a really good thing for them. So they start to, without even realizing it, isolate themselves. So an important step in burnout prevention is to be aware of your particular signs of stress. So you can be on the watch for those. And you can also let the other people around you know, these are the things that happen to me when I start to get stressed out. If you notice them, point them out to me so I can do something about it. What are your triggers? So we all have different triggers as well. So is your trigger when the demands are too high, when you've got too much workload, when you've got so many emails that have come in, or deadlines, and you start to think to yourself, oh, I'm never going to be able to get this done. I can never finish anything, all that kind of, those kind of negative self-talk. Or control, is that one of your triggers? So feeling undermined or not consulted or having no say in the workplace. Relationships, so maybe it's in negativity between colleagues, or not having enough support, or rudeness, or incivility. Yeah, so maybe that's one of your triggers. Or maybe not having job security is one of your triggers, or even change. So changing processes, or changing principals, or staff that you're working with, or classes that that you're working with could trigger for you. So what to do if you notice signs of burnout? Well, often when people notice that they're burning out, they tend to go faster and harder, as I've mentioned before. Whereas what you really need to do is actually start to slow down and shift to a lower gear. As you see in this car going uphill, you wouldn't go to the top gear, you'd actually shift down to a lower gear. So, how do we do that? Well, I've written here some strategies for the individual, but that's not to say that we don't acknowledge that burnout is generally caused by an organisational context. But there's some things that you can do for yourself to protect yourself from the outcome of chronic stress. The first one is self-awareness of symptoms. So have a regular kind of scan of yourself and notice how you're feeling, notice what's coming up regularly. Are there any signs of stress that are coming up? Pause. So it's important not to go, go all the time, and then every spare moment you have, you're looking at your phone, reading news or something. Have a few minutes every day when you stop and think, how am I going? Think realistically about stress you've been under and how that impacts your body and mind. So we can't continue to put our body under stress and overwork it forever. It's going to have an impact on you. And so we need to be able to respond to that by reducing our stress and doing things that help our body and mind. Set realistic goals. So is it realistic to perform at 100% all the time? Well, probably not. Is it realistic to be perfect all the time, or to get every task done, or to volunteer for every school community event? Set goals for the week that are achievable and take the time to acknowledge when you've achieved them. And that's one of the really important things, is that you need to celebrate your small successes. So sometimes in the helping professions, you're faced with difficult situations, and sometimes it can feel like you're not getting anywhere. And so it's important to, you know, at the end of the day, at the end of the week, remind yourself, oh, you know, I did that really well today, or I managed that class well, or I prepared a really interesting lesson on that particular topic, and celebrate what you've done well. Because we have a tendency to focus on what we haven't done so well. Figure out small ways you can have control and autonomy in how you can manage your work. And for some people, that's more important than for others. But in general, how can you get a bit more control in terms of your timetable and so on, and a bit more autonomy in making decisions about how you do your work? And sometimes talking to your manager or your principal will be the way to go for that. Actively seek positive feedback. So it's important to know that we're doing well, and that's one of the rewards we're getting from work. And so, you know, if you are in doubt, make a meeting with your principal and just seek some feedback. What am I doing well? And is there anything I need to work on? Work on something new that interests you. So it's important not to get kind of stuck in the same old task or area. So involve yourself in projects that light that fire of interest again, that, you know, that you find intellectually interesting. We also need to think about our habits too and how they contribute to our stress levels. So, you know, everyone's got unhealthy habits. Maybe that's working through lunch, or you know, staying up too late. So what kind of unhealthy habits do you have that contribute to your stress levels, and what could you replace those with? Is there a ritual that you could have to wind down at night so you're getting to bed a bit earlier? Or could you set the first 3/4 of lunch to have a break from kids, and then let your students know that you'll be back in the classroom 10 minutes before the bell rings? So it's setting some boundaries around yourself. So some more ideas about how to protect yourself. Sometimes burnout can be contagious, and you know, that's particularly the case when you get a group of people who are chronic complainers, and you know, you go into the lunchroom and all you'll hear would be negatives, and how, you know, the school management are not doing the right thing, and the Department of Education not doing the right thing, and the parents are not doing the right thing, and it can all feel very helpless. And so if that's the case in your workplace, then avoid the lunchroom if that's the case, and take yourself out and sit in the sunshine for your lunch break. Be also aware of who in your school are the chronic complainers, and protect yourself from them. Doesn't mean you need to completely shut yourself off, but try and avoid getting caught into those same old complaining conversations with them. However, when you have a difficult student or a conversation with a parent that you find stressful, venting and debriefing with a colleague is important. So, or your principal even. So talking about what you find difficult about working with this particular student, or what you find difficult about, you know, that conversation with the parent, what you're worried about, you know, those kinds of things that help you get something off your chest, and it can lighten your load a little bit. So there's a difference between chronic complaining and healthy venting or debriefing. And also, going back to the lecture on suicide prevention, if any of those kind of scenarios come up where you have to make a decision about someone at risk, that's quite stressful. And so it's always a good idea to debrief with someone afterwards, to help it get out of your head and, you know, talk it through. Try and look at the unhelpful thinking that we talked about in the beliefs about self and others lecture, and think about, are you using any of those kind of unhelpful thinking styles that may be stressing you out? So become aware of those. Having a to-do list before you leave work is a really, really simple strategy, but it's very important because what happens if you don't write things down is that your brain kind of, not even being aware of it, tries to hold on to all those things. And then you might notice that you wake up in the middle of the night and goes, oh, I've got to respond to that email, or, oh, I forgot to do that. So if you write down on your tasks, it can relieve your mind, before you leave work. And so you can really just focus on relaxing. Find a mentor. So find an experienced teacher, not one of these superstar teachers that do everything and everything amazingly well, but find a teacher that enjoys their job, that has the balance right, that isn't totally disengaged, but isn't completely overcommitted either. And learn from them, listen to them, talk to them about how they manage that. So breaks are really important. And sometimes when you've got a difficult situation or someone's asking you to do something, you're not quite sure what to do, just taking 5 minutes or saying, oh, I'll get back to you on that one, is a good strategy. So you don't need to make a decision right there and then. So just getting a bit of distance. Having little pauses throughout the day. So when I was talking about pauses to scan how you're going, so maybe that's sitting in the sun for 5 minutes, or just, when all the kids have left the classroom, reflecting on how you're feeling, doing nothing for 5 minutes between tasks, and even doing some breathing exercises or things like that. Be careful with overtime and checking emails at home, because what happens is your brain is never switched off. If you constantly have, say, if your work emails go to your phone, you're never away from work really. So, I would avoid that if at all possible. Is it really necessary for you to be checking in on work at all times? Lunch breaks are quite important for your longevity, and it may seem like you've got work to do, and so you work on over your lunch break, but over time that starts to have an impact on you. So you haven't had a break all day, you get home, you're shattered, and you don't have the energy for, to go for a walk or spend time with your family, that kind of thing. So it's, it is important to take a break. You don't have to take the whole lunch break, but just some of that time, just to decompress a little bit, to get away from the students, to get away from people making demands on you. Take a day off when the stress really starts to impact. So it's better to take a day or two sick leave than to leave it and push yourself through and then have to take a month off, 6 months down the track. It's much better to recognize those earlier symptoms and respond to those. In terms of bringing work home, that's a really tricky one for teachers. And so it's better to bring work home only if you know you'll do it, and try and bring home the stuff that's less taxing or more fun or easy. Because there's nothing worse than bringing something like a whole pile of marking. I do this all the time. Whole pile of marking, and then you don't have the energy to get to it that night. And so it just sits there, and it's like this pile of doom that's always reminding you of work you haven't done. So unless you're absolutely sure you're going to get to it, don't bring it home. So relaxation and decompression. So you need to think about yourself and your body and your stress coping response as a bank account. So the more withdrawals you make from this bank account when it comes to workload or stressful situations at work, so those are withdrawals, the more relaxation deposits you need. So relaxation is a deliberate process that brings on the relaxation response. And that response can't actually coincide with the stress response. So to bring on the relaxation response automatically shuts down the stress response. And that over time, if you do that regularly, it can really help with your symptoms of stress and burnout. So the relaxation response can, you probably remember the relaxation response from doing human biology maybe. It can be brought on by guided imagery, by yoga, by massage, meditation, mindfulness. There's also apps that you can try. My favorite to recommend to clients is the Smiling Minds app. That's a really good one. And decompress. So learn how to make the transition between work and home. So learn how to make that cutoff between being on work time and being on home time. So some people like to, you know, take a shower after work so they can kind of like, that's the end of my work day and now I'm relaxing or in family mode or whatever. Sometimes people like to take a walk between work and home. Or maybe you like to listen to some music on the way home. But find some way to make that distinction between work and home, particularly if you find yourself working from home and, you know, not being able to shut off. So here are some readings that you can have a look at around burnout contagion. This First Aid for Teacher Burnout is a really good book. So it's an ebook. I recommend you have a look at that. The Resilient Practitioner is really a really great book on burnout. And it's really useful in understanding the more personal aspects of what can cause burnout. And emotional labour. There's an article about emotional labour, and that's referring to the work that you do in responding to your students' needs. Well, I hope you found this useful, and I wish you all a very long and happy career that's free of burnout.